hiring these wrongfully terminated employees. The request for an immediate administrative stay is denied. Given that the district court, that's Judge Alsup, the trial court judge, found that the employees were wrongfully terminated and ordered an immediate return to the status quo, in other words, rehire them, an administrative stay of the district court's order would not preserve the status quo. It would do just the opposite. It would disrupt the status quo and turn it on its head. That is sort of an oblique way of the court saying, you, Trump administration, don't get to rush through something that's unlawful and then argue that, oh, you have to freeze that unlawful status quo. The appeals court said, no, actually, the status quo is people being employed by the federal government and then you all trying to wrongfully terminate them. So we see what the Trump administration is trying to do, and this appeals court opinion, 2-to-1 opinion, sort of calls them out on it.
So, Glenn, the trial court had obviously ordered that Trump rehire these probationary employees. As it made its way up to the appeals court, Trump wanted to stay that ruling, meaning prevent that ruling from taking effect while the case continued to play itself out in the appeals court. Obviously, we find out now, based on this 2-to-1 ruling, that the judges in the appeals court weren't willing to stay or block this decision to allow these probationary employees to come back to work. So that's a win, but the broader case here is still being litigated. So can you speak about that? When is the broader context of this entire case going to be litigated?
Yeah, Brian, it's a great question because this is procedurally dense and we don't want to oversell the importance of any one court ruling. This is the kind of ruling that applies for the moment. It's important because it tells the Trump administration, no, you cannot keep in place this wrongful termination. You have to start rehiring these people. However, this is kind of a ruling for the moment or for the day because the bigger issue is still before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals regarding whether that lower court order should sort of remain in effect, whether it was right, whether it was lawful. And so this court, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, said, we deny your motion today for a stay, Trump administration. However, we have ordered more briefs to be filed on the underlying issue of, the lawfulness and whether this should endure long term, meaning during the life of this entire litigation, which could take months and months. And those briefs are due March 18th, and then there will be more hearings on the underlying issue before the Court of Appeals. So these things are confusing, they're procedurally dense. This is a win for the day, but it's not a win yet for all time in this case.
Glenn, on the screen right now, I'm going to put a headline from Axios saying that climate and energy agencies are hiring back probationary employees. So can I have your reaction to the fact that in response to this ruling by both the trial court and the appeals court right now, we are seeing steps being taken by this administration to comply with the court orders?
Yeah, headlines like that, Brian, are frankly very heartening because what that indicates is, at least in the context of this case that the Trump administration is losing, has been losing, and has now been ordered by courts to rehire people they wrongfully terminated. What are they doing? They're complying, apparently, given that Axios headline, with those court orders. That's important because, there is a parade of horribles going on every day in the Trump administration. But one of the things we have been keeping our eye on is, will the Trump administration plunge us into a true constitutional crisis and just start defying, violating, refusing to obey all court orders? If so, then our democracy is in deep, deep trouble.
Glenn, obviously, we're going to wait for this ruling from the appeals court. The fact that they refused to grant this stay that was requested by Trump is a step in the right direction. It's a good sign. I think we can maybe take something from the tea leaves on that. But really, ultimately, the final arbiter of this is going to be the Supreme Court. So how do you expect that the Supreme Court, do you have any indication of how the Supreme Court might rule based on their previous actions? And the second part of that question is, when can we expect some decision from the Supreme Court if they do indeed decide to hear this case?
Yeah, so I think, let me take the last question first. When? Probably pretty quickly. Why? Because all of these temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions are very disruptive. They're disruptive to the lives of the employees who are being wrongfully terminated. They're losing their paychecks. They're losing their health care. They may be losing their apartments or their homes, their houses. So these things need to be litigated quickly. And then the flip side of it is, if these are lawful exercises of executive branch powers and authority, then it would be viewed as an inappropriate interference with the function of the executive branch. Of course, given the almost universal rulings in case after case from coast to coast that Donald Trump's administration is involved in illegal, wrongful, and often unconstitutional conduct, it seems like, the people who are being victimized have the better of the argument when it comes to the exigency, the need to get these things resolved quickly. But so I have a feeling on the timing front, we'll probably see this thing bubble up to the Supreme Court pretty quickly.
Real quick question on that. Do we have to wait for the Supreme Court's decision days all the way in May, or is this the kind of thing that they would rule on immediately, given the nature of either having to get these employees back to work or not?
Yeah, this is not a smart alecky answer, Brian. Only the Supreme Court knows for sure. They can grab hold of these cases while they're still in a preliminary litigation posture with these temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions before there's ever been a full-blown evidentiary hearing on the merits. And the Supreme Court could say, you know what, we think the issue at stake is so grave and so far-reaching, executive branch power versus, the rights of wrongfully terminated federal government employees, that we're going to grab hold of it now. Or they can do what they have done in the past and said, listen, we believe that these orders that have been put in place by trial courts and affirmed by federal circuit courts of appeal were properly handled. We are not going to grab hold of this one until this case has run its course, been fully litigated, resolved in the trial court, resolved in the appeals court, and that could take months. So again, I'm going to go back to what sounds like a smart aleck answer, but it's really not. Only the Supreme Court knows for sure.
Okay, now the second part of that question, what do you have any indication as to how the Supreme Court might rule based on past decisions?
So the most recent decision is the one I'm holding fast to, Brian, as I suspect our viewers are, because the Supreme Court rejected the Trump administration's position. That had to do with whether the Trump administration had to pay on contracts that were entered into by the administration with USAID, USAID, for services that have already been performed or goods that had already been delivered. And these government contractors were standing there with their invoices saying, I did my part. I complied with my contractual obligation. How about you pay me, federal government? Donald Trump didn't want to. And the Supreme Court said, guess what? The lower court said you have to. And we're not going to disturb it, certainly not at this early phase of the litigation. Let's hold on to that one, Brian. Let's hope that justice is trending as an indication that that was the most recent Supreme Court ruling, and it went against the Trump administration, because we have to acknowledge that so many Supreme Court opinions prior to that one, they found a way to, throw a bone to Donald Trump and give him whatever it was he was asking for, regardless of the pesky language of the Constitution.
Well, I will grab on to whatever optimism we can find these days. So with that said, we will, of course, stay on top of this court case as it continues to make its way through the court system. Right now, we have a decision from the trial court, a decision from the appeals court, but this will still be litigated further in the appeals court. And then, of course, we have to wait for it to bubble its way up to the Supreme Court. So for those who are watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.